30 years ago, last month, millions of Americans tuned in to their local Fox affiliate and were introduced to a bizarre sight, the very first episode of the television phenomenon called The X-Files. The premise of the show was straightforward, for those of you that don't know. Two FBI agents were assigned the weird cases, the career-ending cases, cases that defied reason, logic, and science, cases that were inexorably drawn down into a dark and mysterious labyrinth of lies and deception and cover-ups of what was perhaps the greatest discovery of all time, that humanity was not alone, that alien life was not only real, they were here on Earth and had been for some time. Over 9 years, these two agents explored and fought, faced inexplicable at the boundaries of the known, overcame countless dangers, both domestic and rather foreign, in their zealous and often controversial search for the truth. It was a buddy cop show. It was science fiction. It was funny. It was creepy. There had been nothing like it before or since. I will admit that my adolescent imagination has colored up my memories, rather robustly in some cases, but I will submit that this television series was, in fact, remarkable, not the least of which for how novel it was. This was arguably the first time in TV history that TV producers required audiences to actually pay attention. TV at that time was very serial, kind of campy, but the work of the average audience was rather minimal. Just not much you had to do. Common wisdom had it that a show like The X-Files would only be interesting if there was some new fright to introduce, a monster of the week format. The X-Files gave that, but asked for more. As a TV show primarily about a conspiracy theory, the governments of the world conspiring to hide the fact of intelligent alien life, the show only gradually revealed aspects of the conspiracy, who the players were, what the aliens wanted, and what that all meant for the fate of humanity. The critics were unimpressed. They knew that U.S. audiences would quickly grow tired of waiting for obscure clues threaded through only sparingly across a 20-episode per season schedule of primetime TV. They said that audiences would grow bored. They said the premise could not work. They were wrong. On average, over 15 million viewers tuned in each week. The show was not only popular, it was actually good. It claimed 16 Emmy Awards out of 62 nominations, making The X-Files one of the most popular and critically acclaimed television shows in the history of the medium. One of the most compelling things about the show was its willingness to engage seriously with pop culture material. In the very first episode, scientist and skeptic Dana Scully visits her soon-to-be partner, Fox Mulder, in his forgotten basement in the FBI and sees a poster over his desk, a blurry photo of a flying saucer with bold text underneath that reads, "I want to believe." I have a replica of that in my home office. I want to believe. But what? Well, it turns out that here in the United States, there's a rather long history of the unexplained. Some of you may be familiar with the so-called Roswell incident of 1947. Anybody heard that one before? A couple of you, I'm sure, right? You have to have. The story goes that in the summer of 1947, an object was discovered outside of the New Mexico town of Roswell. This was the third interesting report that particular summer. The first two had been by pilots, different pilots, who reported seeing strange objects that they had described to media as, quote, flying saucers. The official government response to the UFO phenomenon was, perhaps surprisingly to us, 21st century skeptics, robust. Project Sign, and later Project Grudge, and then Project Blue Book documented and explored over 12,000 sightings from 1947 to 1969. According to official reports, most of those incidents were found to have explanations that were decidedly not extraterrestrial. But with that said, almost a quarter of them remained unexplained. And that brings me to the curious case of Betty and Barney Hill. In 1961, Betty and Barney Hill were taking a short vacation. They'd traveled west from New Hampshire to Niagara Falls, then up to Montreal before heading back home to New Hampshire. On that last leg, something happened. As the couple tells the story, they were on their way home when they saw a light in the sky. Betty assumed it was a meteor at first, but the movement was irregular. And they quickly realized that this could not be an airplane either. The object descended towards their vehicle and hovered about 80 feet or so over their car. Barney said later that it reminded him of a huge pancake. Using binoculars, Barney claimed to have seen humanoid figures wearing black uniforms and black caps looking back at him. The craft apparently departed soon after. After returning home, the Hills shared their story, at first reluctantly, and then with the encouragement of friends and family, a bit more broadly. They even reported it to the Air Force. Transcripts of that report are available today. These transcripts described evidence like the Hills' watches never working again after that night. The strap on the binoculars was broken, but neither could recollect why. Barney's shoes were suddenly heavily scuffed. Betty's dress was torn and had strange powder stains. Strange, shiny circles were found on their car. Circles that, when a compass was brought near it, caused the compass needles to spin wildly. Only later did the couple learn that their trip from Montreal, which should have been 3 hours long, took 7. These facts perplexed the Hills. So did Barney's growing anxiety and Betty's strikingly vivid dreams. I should stress that these are educated people. Betty went to college. Barney was active in the civil rights movement. As a mixed-race couple living in New England, they were intimately aware of the civil rights movement and were actively engaged in the struggle for equality. They cared. They were not rubes. They were not easily bedazzled rural bumpkins or some other stereotype. They read the papers. They were up on the science of the day. And that is probably why, together, they joined their local Unitarian church. To explain just a bit more, 1961 was right in the middle of the Cold War. Very high-profile cases of espionage were fresh in the minds of Americans and fed into this kind of culture of secrecy. It was also the age of big science. After the Manhattan experiment, the government's investment in scientific research had grown by several orders of magnitude. And there was this Russian satellite, Sputnik, winking from the sky. Alternative and unorthodox claims, science-ish, scientists, science-adjacent, anything that smelled of pseudoscience, quackery, and possibly fraud, threatened not only massive science funding, but also threatened national security. And that is in part why the government stopped talking publicly about UFOs. The Hills, faced with inaction from trusted civil and military authorities, turned to another source for explanation. They went to modern science. Now, it's worth pausing here to recall that psychology is very different today than it was 60 years ago. Back then, the prevailing theory was behaviorism. What was inside your head didn't matter. Everything could be explained by stimuli going into the black box of the human brain and coming out as behaviors. This view aligned very neatly with humanism, which taught very straightforwardly that humans had an obligation to create themselves, to better themselves, and that logic, reason, science, education, this was exactly how you do that. The idea of a subconscious, or worse, an unconscious, something completely outside of your control, something that directed some or perhaps all of your behavior, was anathema. More, it wasn't until 1959 that linguist Noam Chomsky actually launched the science of cognitive psychology, when he showed definitively that such mechanisms in the brain had to exist, or else the scientific data around human language would be impossible to understand. Now, that's interesting history. I'll save that for coffee in the common room. But the point, in 1961, the science of psychology was unfortunately not quite what we know it to be today. The practice of hypnotism was somewhat less. But the Hills could not know that. Psychology as a whole was science, and science was something that Unitarians trust. So what they got was evidence. On par with the evidence of their damaged clothing and spinning compasses were these new, quote, memories. Memories of little gray men with large eyes performing numerous and invasive medical tests in their mysteriously missing hours. Those of you who are familiar with the X-Files will recognize many of these details. Followers of the genre also will too. Over the years since, thousands of similar cases have been reported. Many of them share this basic template of the Hill case. Many of the details are likewise the same: missing time, little gray men, probes. But Betty and Barney Hill were the first case of alien abduction in the United States. And I just want to pause here a moment. We UUs claim presidents, writers, artists as part of our tradition, and we're perfectly happy celebrating our contribution to American history and holidays like Christmas. So in that spirit, you can now add another star to your UU constellation. We started the alien abduction craze. You're welcome. In the years that followed, the Hills told and retold their story. In 1966, their story was published in a book titled The Interrupted Journey. In the early 70s, James Earl Jones bought the movie rights, which he called the UFO incident, and he even starred in it. Carl Sagan devoted one night of his TV show Cosmos to the Hills. Much of this is discussed in the book, The Abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, published this year with the subtitle, Alien Encounters, Civil Rights, and the New Age in America. This is the latest of many books about aliens and abductions in general and about the Hills in specific. And in this book, author Matthew Bauman takes great pains to not simply dismiss the Hills and their experiences. Instead, he chose to frame their story in the historical context I laid out for you just a moment ago. I believe his analysis is really provocative, that the Hills were a thorough byproduct of their time, and the fascination Americans had and still have with alien abduction grew from this peculiar turning point in American culture, this shift from can-do positivism coming out of World War II into the unease of the Red Scare, the grim secrecy of the Cold War, the unfinished nature of the civil rights movement, the rebellion of the sexual revolution in the 60s, and the culture clashes surrounding the Vietnam War. The Hills, with their steadfast Unitarian faith, their trust in science and in human experience, their convictions that the truth would set us all free. They sought not only answers but support from officials, institution, and modern science, and not finding it, their story slides neatly and easily into what we now call alternative science, the New Age, or perhaps conspiracy theory. Their story began with a light in the sky. Later interviews featured abduction and medical testing. Still later interviews featured government cover-up, secret knowledge, fringe science, a vast network of shadowy international figures intent on hiding the truth from the people. Just do your own research and you'll find it. The truth is out there. Barney Hill died in 1969. Betty died in 2004. Each was said to have believed undeterred and unwaveringly to the very end of their days that on a summer night in 1961 in rural New Hampshire, they made contact with alien life. And they believed that you and I needed to know, that you and I deserved to know the truth. And for their beliefs and their efforts, they were ridiculed, mocked, and ostracized. To be honest, there are many reasons to doubt the Hills. Carl Sagan championed several, including the now famous argument from the vastness of space, the maximum rate of travel, and the sheer time involved in interstellar flights. Sagan is convincing. And to be quite blunt, there are other equally compelling reasons to believe that aliens have not arrived here on Earth, and that's aside from the questionable science of hypnotism in 1960. Many of those arguments are collected in books that border on and are actually informed by science fiction. You can check out some of those discussions in a book I've mentioned before with the title, If the Universe is Teeming with Aliens, Where is Everybody? 50 Solutions to the Fermi Paradox and the Problem of Extraterrestrial Life by author Stephen Webb. You can find that on Amazon or your favorite bookstore. It does now have an update to include 25 additional solutions to this problem. But like the prophet Olamina in Octavia Butler's novel, The Parable of the Sower, I personally am convinced that if humanity can be said to have a destiny, that destiny is up there among the stars. And so, perhaps like many of you, I look to the night sky for hope, for inspiration, for aspiration, for perspective. I think of our pale blue dot and conclude with Carl Sagan that there is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than the image of our planet seen from millions of miles away. Sagan called us a mote suspended on a sunbeam. His imagery is humbling, and I think humility is absolutely appropriate when facing the vastness of space and the ocean of mystery that we merely stand on the shores of. In 2004, Navy pilots reported seeing tic-tac-shaped objects accelerating at impossible speeds over the Pacific Ocean. Videos from the incident are now public and have not been explained. In 2014, Navy pilots reported seeing a, quote, gray cube inside a clear sphere whose erratic flight forced fighter jets to take evasive action. This past summer, these two incidents were described by the military pilots in question during a congressional hearing. These were only two examples of what Congress heard was hundreds of such sightings from military and commercial pilots over the last 30 years. Many of these incidents are supported by video and photographic evidence. In that hearing, Congress also heard testimony that the military currently has possession of several crashed UFOs and even has been secretly appropriating money to fund a long-standing program attempting to reverse engineer the technology found in them. Also, that the military has possession of, quote, non-human biologics recovered from these craft. The Pentagon denies these allegations with a clarity and decisiveness that would have left the FBI investigators from the X-Files laughing out loud. And I confess, I wonder if Betty and Barney Hill would have taken any comfort in these proceedings. I hope so. And I will offer this as we turn to the close. Speaking personally, I feel that I should say that I find the story of Betty and Barney Hill hard to take at face value. Something happened, but we may never know what. But I think of that X-Files poster above my desk. I want to believe. So this morning, I want to leave you with something just a tad orthogonal to that, a tad different. Call it questions for further reflection, food for thought. What do you do with your own experiences of transcendent mystery, wonder, and awe? How do you carry those with you out into the world? What obligation do you have to testify to the truth as you know it? And what do you do when the whole world disbelieves you? My friends, the truth is, I'm asking you, because I don't have an answer, just questions. And so it is this morning that I'll give the final word to the bard. Act 1, Scene 5. Hamlet has been told by the guards that they have seen the ghost of his father haunting the castle wall the last few nights. So Hamlet takes his friend Horatio up the following night, and there they meet the apparition. Now, Horatio is a scholar, a practical, down-to-earth type. He doesn't believe in ghosts. After his experience, he is stunned. All he can say is this: "Oh, day and night, but this is wondrous, strange." And that's when his friend Hamlet replies, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." I know of no truer truth than that. Amen.
Visit us at uusg.org.